Hello, and welcome to the Nervous System, Part 4. In this video, we will be discussing the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brain ventricles, and the meninges, which are all parts of the brain. So first we have the cerebrum. And the cerebrum is the largest brain portion, which controls various cognitive applications such as memory, reasoning, and planning. And these things have more so to do with intelligence than physical applications. And so the cerebrum has an outer layer which is known as the cerebral cortex. And in the cerebral cortex, there are many curves and depressions known as gyri and sulci, respectively. So these curves and depressions give you a very good indication of how intelligent a person is. For example, if you take Albert Einstein, when his brain was studied, it was found that his brain had more curves and depressions than the average person, making him more intelligent and able to process more information at a better rate than a normal human being. So, the more gyri and sulci the more information the brain can process because these curves and depressions are basically known for increasing the surface area of the brain. Next, next we have the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is the second largest portion of the brain, right after the cerebrum. So the cerebellum is found at the back of the head, which is under the occipital lobe, which, as we mentioned in the past video, controls the vision. So the cerebellum controls basically the body's sense of equilibrium and balance, which also can be connected to voluntary movement. Because if you've ever tried to balance on something, it takes skeletal muscle to be able to balance. So it's important to understand that the cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain, located at the back, which controls voluntary movement and balance. So next we have the brain ventricles. So there are four brain ventricles slash cavities in the brain. So it's important to understand that in this sense, cavities and ventricles mean the same thing. They can be used interchangeably. So each cavity or ventricle is filled with a certain fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. And this fluid acts as protection for the brain against injury. So, to produce this cerebrospinal fluid, each cavity of the brain, each cavity contains an organ or a part called the choroid plexus. And as we stated earlier, this choroid plexus produces cerebrospinal fluid. And as we mentioned earlier, cavities are also called ventricles, which can be used interchangeably. So, and the abbreviation for cerebrospinal fluid is CSF. Next, we're going to be discussing the meninges. So, the meninges are layers which are comprised of connective tissue that provide protection to the CNS, or central nervous system, comprised of the brain and spinal cord. So, there are three layers that go in this order. We have the first layer is called the dura mater. So, the dura mater is a sac of blood vessels and fibers which are basically held together by collagen, which is a protein that helps protect the brain and spinal cord. Again, this first layer contains cerebrospinal fluid, which supplies the brain and spinal cord with blood. Again, the meninges are basically the sole purpose of these is for protection for the brain. So the second layer is called the arachnoid matter, which contains basically fibers that attach to the layer below it, which is called the pia mater. So again, the arachnoid matter includes a space filled with cerebrospinal fluid called the subarachnoid space. So sub basically means below, so this space can be found below the arachnoid matter. And again, it is filled with CSF or cerebrospinal fluid. And now the third layer we have is the pia mater, which is the most delicate part of the meninges. So this pia mater is a fragile membrane of tissue that has complete contact with the CNS. Basically, it resides basically on the brain and spinal cord. And again, this layer contains a plentiful supply of blood vessels. So, as we mentioned earlier, the meninges are basically for protection for the brain against injury or any external force. Question time. What is the correct order of the meninges of the brain? I'll give you 5 seconds to answer. If you said D, dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater, you are correct. So A says CNS, PNS, SNS. So when answering the question, you should have automatically gotten rid of this answer choice because these are basically abbreviations for the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and somatic nervous system. And these systems do not have an order. So because of that, we can off the bat get rid of A and C. Then we have B, which says pia mater, arachnoid mater, dura mater. So as we said earlier, the pia mater has connect or direct contact with the brain. So that would be the last part because we are going to be in decreasing order. So dura mater, then arachnoid matter, then directly on the brain is pia mater, then under the pia mater would be the brain. So the correct answer is dura mater, arachnoid matter, pia mater. And I like to remember this order by using the acronym DAP, DAP. Question 2. How many ventricles are present in the brain? I'll give you 5 seconds to answer. If you said 4, you are correct. So this question is basically just a memorization question. It's important to know there are 4 ventricles or cavities inside the brain, each with a choroid plexus, which produces CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. Question 3. Which part of the brain is responsible for controlling equilibrium and balance? I'll give you 5 seconds to answer. If you said A, cerebellum, you are correct. So again, the cerebellum is located is located at the back of the brain, and this part is basically responsible for controlling, again, equilibrium and balance, as we explained earlier. B and C are gyri and sulci, which isn't a organ or a part in the brain, but basically an attribute of the brain. So gyri is the convolutions or curves, and sulci are the depressions, which basically increase the surface area of the brain to basically signifying that this person who the brain belongs to can process information at a higher rate. And then we have D, which is the cerebrum, which is the biggest part or the largest part of the brain, which controls voluntary functions, which is incorrect. And so back to the cerebellum. The cerebellum is underneath the occipital lobe, which controls vision. So the cerebellum is found at the back of the head. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.